Man's existence is dependent on three basic needs, which are food, clothing, and shelter. But the most crucial of these needs is food. Food security, the United Nations Committee on World Food Security, believes is necessary for an active and healthy life. So does the Buhari-led administration. In pursuance to this, the government in the last 6 years has not only shown concern about that, but also how to make more Nigerians embrace agriculture as a means of livelihood in the face of the huge unemployment scenario. Consequently, several programs and initiatives have been rolled out by the present administration to empower Nigerians and also ensure that the nation is sufficient in food production. On Frontiers today, we will be taking a look at efforts at tackling food insecurity in Nigeria and the African continent as a whole. I am Obiageli Ugweke. To give deeper insight into the issue at hand is Emmanuel Okobeni, Director, Program Development and Commercialization, African Agricultural Technology Foundation. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
The program continues shortly. Please stay with us. Ms. Okobeni, once more you're welcome to Frontiers. There have been a number of reports by the Food and Agricultural Organization that food crisis would be experienced in Nigeria and across the African continent. What parameters have given rise to this?
The Food and Agricultural Organization does follow food production trend around the whole world, and then they keep statistics, and they look at the major crops you grow in your country. And of course, they also have statistics on livestock, the fisheries, and so on. And so they are able to predict if there are going to be problems. They look at food production levels, and then they look at your population, and that is estimated every year. And of course, they also look at your response patterns to issues like climate change is one of them, and how well you are able to improve your supply chains, like, for example, inputs that will be needed by farmers, and use that to assess. And of course, Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, and that means that roughly Nigerian, you have one Nigerian, in every 6 Africans, and food crisis could have strong implications politically, economically, for the country. And generally in Africa, the trend is not so very encouraging. Although I must say here that there has been some improvement over time. And then, but again, we need to increase the curve line, the gradient, the rate of increase in food production is critical, and not just for food. Again, also, they're also looking at nutrition security, and health problems have been also related to food. So we are just using agriculture to address food and nutrition security. So basically, with the threats of climate change, that makes it much more difficult. So you need to assess how well prepared you are in terms of the resilience you build in your food systems. So we must be looking forward to drive food systems resilience, and your production statistics say all that.
All right, now we are currently in an age where technology has brought tremendous changes in the way of life and as well the way we do things. But it appears that not so much innovation has been done in terms of farming. How can this be achieved in Nigeria?
On the contrary, there has been a lot done, but they are not seeing the light of the day. A lot of innovations are sitting on the shelf. And there are also other things that are not making those technologies to see the light of the day. So we must move away from our traditional approach to agriculture. And what I'm saying is that in the traditional system, farmers grow to supplement income, more subsistence driven. But if you bring in some business orientation to agriculture, people will look for the innovations and technologies, all right? And that will spur the use, increase the use of technologies on the farmer's field. And of course, development of technologies does not essentially translate to usage on the farmer's field. So in between the farmers and the lab and the universities, the centers developing those technologies, a lot of things need to be fixed in that middle. And that wasn't done for so long. And right now we are trying to address that and try to see that we adopt a value chain approach. The value chain approach will mean that you identify those who will be helping to disseminate and transfer the technologies in a way that farmers can readily use them. So some technologies are not readily usable, and that's because not much efforts there. So you will need to invest in that middle part of the value chain, and also strengthen public-private partnership. If you do that, you will incentivize the private sector. Now, people go into business because they want to make money, and therefore agriculture must not just be seen as a way of life, but it must be seen as a kind of a function that you devote your time, you put in a lot of resources that will give you some reason to want to continue to remain in that field.
There are actually some factors that tend to hamper crop growth and optimal yields, like insect infestation. This was reported in some states in Nigeria where acres of farmland were leveled by locusts and quailer birds. How can this be prevented or curbed?
Yeah, so you have a lot of challenges, and it's not only in agriculture, basically. And that's why you have technologies being developed. And different challenges require different solutions. And birds, or whatever you call it, quailer birds or locusts, all of them are pests, okay? They are pests. Even weeds can be a problem. So there are a lot of technologies that can be explored to control pests. All right. You will discover that over years people have been highly dependent on the use of pesticides. All right, but it has its own effect. Excessive use of herbicides does have also effect on the environment, and even sometimes on the health of farmers. And even sometimes excessive use of pesticides can also mean that you don't have access to markets, because the residual effect of your pest on your crops could mean that you take your crops to Europe, and they say there's high levels of pest usage on your product, and it's not considered safe for consumption. So what I was trying to say is that, yes, you cannot completely avoid it, but again, we must understand and follow the principles guiding the usage of such pesticides. Then secondly, you want to try to look for options that could reduce the high rate of application of pesticides. So this is what is driving all kinds of technologies. You must have heard of what you call the fall armyworm in maize,
yes,
when it came from.
Yes.
And there are all kinds of approaches. People using what you call pheromones. Pheromones are a ways of, you can use it to track the pest. You can track the pest by knowing whether the pest is around. Of course, some chemicals can control that. We are trying to use other approaches that may not involve. You must have heard of BT, okay? There are all kinds of strategies, and then you control. Right now, some people are trying to study the biology of the crop. When you study the biology of the crop, you try to find ways. You try to find weaknesses in the biology when the pest is most vulnerable, and then you attack that pest at that level. So before they start causing major problems. But one of the things we can use in Nigeria is that we need to increase our surveillance power. All right. When you do good surveillance, you immediately know when the pest is approaching, and then you nip it in the bud just before it goes widespread. All right. But because we don't have good monitoring, we don't have good surveillance, we react when the damage is already done. So by taking preemptive action quickly, you can also control that. So for different pests, you have different ways of doing it. And of course, there are also what you call biorationals, biopests. We don't want to use this inorganic toxic pest that leaves a lot of damages in the environment. So you can look for less damaging pests, those ones, we call them biorationals or biopesticides. They might also be very useful. But there are some situations whereby if you don't control it, it becomes much more difficult to control because of the nature of the pest.
Nigeria is looking at ways of boosting food production, and at some point the genetically modified crops were being considered, but so many people are somehow skeptical about the GMOs food. How safe is this GMO for human consumption?
My approach to this is that agriculture is science, and you have to treat science as science. And in science, inferences, their decisions are made based on data generated. And GMO is one of the most safest crops you can. GM crops are one of the most safest crops you can consume. And the first one was released in 1996, and between 1996 and now, there is no clear evidence, all right, to relate GM products to health problems. Let's speak to data. Let's speak to science. And science, again, if you are not in science, you may not know all the basis behind the development of that product. But I can tell you, most people who travel to advanced world where GMs are accepted must have eaten these crops, and they don't know. All right. And so what I'm trying to say here is that Nigeria needs to feed its people. And if Nigeria needs to do that, Nigeria should just look for the technology. I imagine that nobody wants to deal with hunger, because hunger can really create a lot of negative effects. You don't want to see that. And so, like I said, GM is very safe, but by the time it's developed, a lot of things are checked. We check it for food and feed safety. All right. I don't want to go into much of science because they do composition analysis. Okay. We test for allergenicity. We test for many things. So the data supporting the release of product is so robust, and is subjected to rigorous processes. All right, and it comes out. The issue there is that there are those who feel threatened by new technologies, but there is always a big room to accommodate all. All right, now if you were selling pesticides and you want people to control a pest, right, through chemicals, you will probably feel threatened that the farmer who is being given a GM that helps it to protect it against insects will not come back to buy the insecticide. But there are places where insecticides can be used, so we should not feel threatened. All right, so we should look for technologies that are really innovative, that can bring a change. And this is just where, and it could also create more opportunities for people. As the value chain continues to develop, there will be room for people to have to play one role or the other. So economic interests are also part of those decisions. But those claims people are making about GM as a threat, I want to assure Nigerians that GM products are very safe, and they also contribute also to protection of the environment. Like I mentioned before, a lot of insecticide spray find themselves into the water systems, and that can also be a help to people. And the damage, you can also be killing some friendly insects. So there are pros and cons though, but basically we do not use high technology, if you want to call it that way, just for the sake of using it. You must look for what I call appropriate technologies. You don't want to use a hammer to kill a fly. So you look at technologies, and there are positions and situations where they are the best suited. So we are not just using that, but people don't understand what you call crop improvement. All right, crop improvement you involve a lot of genes, and they are not often very easy to manipulate for you to develop the ideal product you want. So you switch to technologies that can help you find ideal or next to ideal products, and this is where GM is coming. And you can combine it with conventional breeding. So conventional breeding does not help you to solve every problem, and you have to switch to other technologies. So GM, actually, we use them where it is inevitable.
All right, Mr. Kobeni, we'll take some time out, and I will be back shortly. This is Frontiers, and we will continue the conversation on tackling food insecurity in just a moment. Stay with us. Glad to know you're still there. Now, still staying with the conversation on GMOs, what are the advantages?
Now, the advantages of GMO, that's what I was saying last time. Now, I'm a plant breeder. I hold a PhD in plant breeding and molecular genetics. And one of the key things that we have benefited from getting to understand biotechnology is that you can really relate with genes driving traits at the molecular level. And with that knowledge, it's very easy to manipulate complex traits. Now you have, I would try not to be too technical, but you are dealing with a trait like yield. Many genes, physiological processes, metabolic pathways are involved. How do you control that in breeding? So oftentimes you want to develop a trait for a farmer, you find something you want, and then you find things you don't want. And that affects the farmer's acceptability of such a product. And so we try to find an efficient way to develop material without making things too complex. And again, the other thing there is that if you look in normal breeding, like I was saying, I don't want to use more technical, as you are transferring the genes you want, the other set of genes go with it. All right? And that is the issue. So biotechnology is very big. We use molecular markers to select good materials. But if you find a farmer who likes a product, what we call them land races, they grow it on their farms. They've developed it over time through selection. That material is good, but lacking just in one thing. Do you discard it because the farmer's material is lacking in one thing that is not helping it to increase productivity? No. So, because we now know the genes through biotechnology, we just take that one gene and we put there. Now, the issue there is that often the gene may not always come from that particular plant. I'm using plant, we call them species. And so you need to go elsewhere to find that gene and bring in there. But it exists in nature. It exists in nature. So the advantage is that you quickly introduce a trait into a material that is already desirable for the farmer through GM. So it's just a transfer of gene and then it goes there. All right. Now, the disadvantage with it is more because of the so much concern expressed by people. We need to go into a long process. So the development is longer, not because of the science, but because we want to convince people as much as possible that we've done a thorough work and that it is safe.
Talking about low yield, one of the challenges farmers in Nigeria are actually faced with is post-harvest losses. How can this be squarely addressed?
Yeah, that's another big question you've asked, and a very important question. And we are struggling to improve yield, and then we do a lot, and then you get the yield, and somehow we lose the yield. Now, different crops also have different biological problems. Cassava, as you know, Nigeria is the biggest producer of cassava. Cassava biologically does have physiological problems. We call it post-harvest physiological deterioration. So you cannot keep cassava for 48 hours, all right, beyond 48 hours. So the farmer loses a lot of money. If you look at cowpea also, it suffers from post-harvest. It's pest on the field for yield, pest outside the field also. We have brookids, you know, and then they eat up your grains, you know. I don't want to start going to the scientific names, but again, post-harvest is a huge problem. And if you don't have good post-harvest management, the quality of your products in the market becomes also challenged. And you have to produce good products that will be competitive in the market. And if you don't control that post-harvest management aspect, you're going to have farmers use traditional means, but it doesn't work. And a lot of things need to be regulated. Processing is one of them. Processing is one of them. But we still do not have good processing tools in Nigeria and in Africa. You see women who are doing gari. It's so rudimentary in approach. They spend so much time, there's so much energy, and then I don't know. I've seen gari produced. When you see it, because of the way it is roasted, you see a lot of soot, black stuff, and then sand and things. Those are not the kind of things you want to sell outside. Exactly. All right. And then if you have your cowpeas, also you see cowpeas that have holes, eaten by Calabrucus, Maculatus calabrucus, which are the bruchids. They eat it and it doesn't come looking high grade listed. So you lose a lot of money. But a number of things will need to be done. The government will need, for example, we have poor energy in Nigeria, no light, no electricity. You know, a lot of things will need. I've been in Latin America where products are highly refrigerated and sold. You need to control your temperatures. You need to have, so the infrastructure basically doesn't exist. We need to move into systems that helps you to do your processing quickly. You can, things where you can regulate your humidity, your temperature efficiently. You need facilities.
In view of all these challenges that you've mentioned, how can Nigeria and indeed other African countries become major food exporters, given that most countries on the continent are blessed with rich, arable, and human resources?
So the orientation has to change completely. The orientation has to change completely. And I tell people that agriculture is not for everybody. You must learn the skills involved with it. It's a profession. And it's also a field that that you have different experts. You have experts in post-harvest management. You have experts in production, agronomists. You have experts in development, like crop improvement. You have entomologists. This is not just any kind of field, and you need to continue to empower your citizens. All right, we need to make sure that our universities and schools are provided with the best facilities, and then you need to ensure that students who are reading agriculture does understand exactly what it means. We must go the value chain way, where you find opportunities. For example, digital applications, which are normally driven by the youth, also need to be strengthened. So in terms of the land, you have good arable land in Nigeria, but again, and of course in Africa, Africa has the biggest arable land, but it has not been well used. If you look at the yield levels, very much lower than the world average. So a lot of things are not working out. So the whole concept, the orientation has to change, that agriculture is business. And then I haven't talked to you about smart farming. I haven't talked to you about precision farming. A lot, you see tools being used in the US, all right? You need to improve the lands also. You just think the land is there. The land itself needs to be well sustained to maintain productivity. And that's where agronomy is also very important. So you need to develop your manpower. Let your university experts play a role. For example, if you look at Nigeria, the university is almost like a separate system from the national research systems. They need to work together. Your extension systems, digital platforms. What does market profile look for each crop? What should a farmer be looking for? You have not created that system, and farmers actually don't know exactly what you want, and you have not given them that confidence to say they are required and needed. So a lot of money is being lost. You know, when you go to international markets, you see foods coming from other countries, not even Nigeria. All right? You see Nigerian foods being supplied to Nigerians in diaspora from other countries. So Nigerian farmers are not able to get in there. So the value chain system, and then the youths are sitting on the fence. The youths don't want to sit down. You want a GPS guided tractors.
All right, Mr. Okeweni, if you agree with me, we cannot exhaust this topic. Thank you very much. We must appreciate you most sincerely for sharing your thoughts with us on Frontiers.
Yeah, it's a privilege.
We have been taking a look at efforts at tackling food insecurity in Nigeria and the African continent, and our guest was Emmanuel Okobeni, Director, Program Development and Commercialization, African Agricultural Technology Foundation. Thanks for your time. I am Obiageli Ugoke.